Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Welcome back to my channel. Noong nakaraan, pinag-usapan natin ang qualitative research. Ngayong araw, we're going to talk about quantitative research at ano ang kaibahan nito sa qualitative research na napag-usapan natin noong nakaraan. What is quantitative research? Quantitative research is a type of research which is more interested to talk about numerical data rather than non-numerical data. Kung sa atin pa, ito yung uri ng research na mas pinapahalagahan ang numero kaysa sa text or words. Why use quantitative research? Una sa lahat, ginagamit ang ganitong uri ng research kung nais mong i-apply ang resulta ng iyong pag-aaral sa bigger population. Kapag qualitative research kasi, you can only apply your result to the sample or the people you have selected for your research. Pero dito sa quantitative research, kung ano man ang iyong naging result o resulta ng pag-aaral, maaari mo itong i-apply sa iba pang katao na hindi sakop ng iyong sample or mga participants ng iyong study. Another advantage of using quantitative research is you can study numerous people at the same time. Ibig sabihin nito, maaari mong pag-aralan ang kung ilang libong participants o mga katao at the same time. Kapag qualitative research kasi, limitado lamang ang maaari mong isali sa research mo gawa ng limitasyon sa method at sa analysis ng data. Pero dito sa quantitative research, dahil numerical data ang focus natin, maaari mong pagsabaying pag-aralan ang kung ilang libong katao. Ang ilan pang mga advantages ng paggamit ng quantitative research are the following. Una, it can allow for greater objectivity and accuracy. Dahil numero ang focus natin, maaaring magkakaroon tayo ng mas objective at mas accurate na resulta. Pangalawa, data can be consistent and reliable, and at the same time, it's relatively easy to analyze. Dahil kapag meron tayong statistical data, meron tayong basehan kung bakit natin ni-reject or tinanggap ang ating null hypothesis. Ano-ano nga ba ang mga types of quantitative research? The following are the major types of our quantitative research. Una, we have descriptive quantitative research, correlational quantitative research, causal-comparative or quasi-experimental, and then our experimental or empirical quantitative research. Ang una natin pag-uusapan ay yung tungkol sa descriptive research. Ang descriptive research ay ginagamit to simply describe characteristics of a phenomenon being studied and measure the proportion of respondents behaving in a certain manner. Or in other words, ang pinaka-focus lamang nito ay masagot ang what question. Ang mga why questions in research ay hindi nito sakop. In descriptive research, the researcher does not do anything to the variables being studied. Meaning to say, hindi nito ina-alter or minamanipulate. Pag sinasabi nating minamanipulate ang variables sa isang research, may ginagawa ang researcher or may ini-introduce na something ang researcher sa variables being studied. At pag-uusapan natin yan mamaya kung anong klase ng quantitative research ginagawa ang nabanggit ko. Dito sa descriptive research, walang ginagawang kung ano ang researcher sa variables na pinag-aaralan. They simply let the variables be. So oftentimes, the result of this research, of this descriptive research, is used as basis for subsequent studies that entail deeper analysis. Dapat ninyong pakakatandaan na ang descriptive research ay hindi maaaring gamitin sa isang causal relational research in which the aim is to find out whether one variable affects another variable. Dahil ang layunin lamang ng descriptive research ay maisalarawan ang phenomenon or ang sample population being studied. In a descriptive research, usually you do not begin with a hypothesis, but you are more likely to develop one after your data gathering. Gaya nga nasabi ko kanina, ginagawang basis ang descriptive research ng subsequent studies. So may ibang mga researchers na gumagawa muna sila ng isang descriptive research para malaman nila ang patterns of behavior ng kanilang sample population or ang nature ng phenomenon na pinag-aaralan bago sila humantong sa isang klase ng research na kung saan mayroon silang deeper analysis or kailangan nilang pag-aralan ng masusi ang isang phenomenon or sample population. Bibigyan ko kayo ng sample descriptive research. Halimbawa, you want to study about Filipino teenagers' bullying behavior. Maaari mong gamitin ang descriptive research. Kasi ang layunin lamang ng pag-aaral na ito ay simply to describe the teenagers' bullying behavior. Pangalawa, halimbawa rin, gusto mo ng pag-aaral na tungkol sa patterns of behavior of Filipino teens sa social media. Maganda ring gamitin ang descriptive research type dahil ang nature ng pag-aaral mo sa dalawang research samples na to ay tungkol lang sa paglalarawan ng iyong sample population's behavior or ng phenomenon being studied. Sa una, bullying behavior ang pinag-aaralan natin at sa pangalawa, behavior naman ng Filipino teens and social media. Ang pangalawang type ng quantitative research na pag-aaralan natin ay tungkol sa correlational research. As the name implies, you do more than describing your sample population or the variables being studied. Dito sa correlational research, ang main focus natin is to determine the relationship of your variables. You use correlational research if you want to find out if there is a relationship between two variables or if it is unethical or impractical to manipulate one variable to determine whether it is causing the other variable. Halimbawa, ang sinasabi nating manipulation of variable, pwede nating may apply sa nakikita ninyong picture sa slide na ito. Ang paliwanag dito ng outsmarting statistics, mayroon kasing isang pag-aaral na kung saan napag-alaman na ang sales ng ice cream saka crime rate ay mayroong positive relationship. So, ibig bang sabihin nito, ang pagtaas ng crime rate, ang kadahilanan ng pagtaas din ng sales ng ice cream or vice versa, ang sales ng ice cream ang dahilan kung bakit tumataas ang crime rate? Or baka mayroon pang ibang factor. So, kagaya nito, dito sa illustration na to, or dito sa picture na to, meron tayong sun na masasabi nating nagre-represent ng tinatawag na summer months. So, baka ang kadahilanan ng pagtaas ng ice cream sales ay dahil sa isang meteorological condition, which is summer months. At ang kadahilanan din ng pagtaas ng crime rate ay dahil din dito. So during summer, a lot of people are going out or leaving their houses to go on vacation. Kaya nagkakaroon din ng mataas na chance ng isang robbery. Kaya tumataas ang crime rate. So dito sa paliwanag ni outsmarting statistics, makikita natin na although mayroong strong correlation ang ice cream sales tsaka yung crime rate, hindi natin masasabi na one is causing the other. There is one thing that you must remember when it comes to correlational research. Just because there is a strong correlation between two variables does not mean that one causes the other. Gaya ng ginawa kong example a while ago, yung ice cream sales, tsaka yung crime rate. Hindi ibig sabihin dahil meron silang mataas na positive correlation, yung pagtaas ng crime rate ang kadahilanan sa pagtaas din ng sales ng ice cream. Gaya ng paliwanag ng outsmarting statistics kanina, may iba pang kondisyon na maaaring naging dahilan ng pagtaas ng crime rate o ng pagtaas ng ice cream sales. Kaya lagi nating pakakatandaan ito. And I repeat, na just because there is a strong correlation between two variables does not mean that one causes the other. There are three possible relationships of variables in a correlational research: positive, negative, and no correlation at all. In a positive correlation, when one variable is up, the other must also go up. When one variable is going down, the other must also go down. In other words, the same direction lang ang tinatahak ng variables mo sa positive correlation. An example of this one would be height and weight. The taller you get, the heavier you become. Kapag tumatangkad ka, tumataas din ang iyong timbang. Sa negative correlation naman, ito ang tinatawag minsan na inversely proportional correlation kasi kung tumataas yung isang variable, bumababa naman ang isa. An example would be coffee consumption and tiredness. The more cups of coffee you consume, the lower your tiredness level. Kapag no correlation naman, ibig sabihin ang dalawang variables na pinag-aaralan mo ay wala talagang connection. Hindi talaga sila related to one another. Ang example ng no correlation, siguro masasabi natin yung height ng isang tao at yung choice niya ng university. Walang koneksyon ang height ng tao tsaka choice ng university. So ito yung matasabi nating no correlation at all. What are examples of correlational research? On this slide, we have two examples. The first one, second-hand smoke exposure and lung cancer. Halimbawa, you hypothesize that passive smoking or second-hand smoke exposure causes lung cancer. Makakagawa ka ba ng true experiment for this one? Itong sinasabi ko kanina na it's unethical to manipulate the independent variable just to determine whether it causes the dependent variable. So, maaari mo lang gawin ay gumawa ng correlational research that tries to find out kung ang dalawang variables ay correlated. Sa pangalawang example natin, ito naman ang masasabi kong impractical to manipulate the independent variable. Maari mong gawin pero it's impractical. It's really difficult to control greenhouse gas emissions globally just to find out na itong independent variable natin ay nakaka-cause nga ng dependent variable. So the most that you can do ay yung pag-aralan mo yung large-scale data that shows the relationship between the two variables. Sa pangatlong type ng quantitative research, ito naman tinatawag nating causal-comparative or quasi-experimental research. For this one, itong type ng research na to attempts to establish cause-effect relationships among variables. So, maaari nating pag-aaralan na dito yung whether variable A causes variable B or variable B, does it cause variable A? Yung mga ganong tipo ng research. In a causal comparative or quasi-experimental research, kaya siya tinatawag na quasi-experimental research din ay dahil seemingly parang experimental research pero hindi siya talaga experimental research. Bakit kamo? Kasi ang mga criteria na nagpapatunay na ang isang research ay experimental wala sa research type na ito. Halimbawa, there is no random assignment of participants into groups. Bali, hindi kontrolado ng researcher yung pakakabilangang grupo ng bawat participants. So, no random assignment of participants into different groups. And then, use pre-existing or naturally formed groups. Hindi maaaring i-determine ng researcher yung kabibilangang grupo ng bawat participants. Meron na nun before pa mag-start yung research. Or dahil imposibleng gawin, dahil sa ethical consideration, hindi po pwedeng gawin mismo ng researcher yung random assignment of participants into different groups. Kaya, ang maaari na lamang gawin ay just to study the pre-existing or naturally formed groups. At this point, I'd like to give you an example of a causal comparative or a quasi-experimental research. Suppose, for example, a group of researchers is interested in the causes of lung cancer. They might hypothesize that exposure to passive smoking or secondhand smoke is one of the major causes of lung cancer. In this example, it is unethical to randomly assign people to groups with exposure or non-exposure to secondhand smoke. It is also unethical to manipulate the degree of smoke they inhale. Therefore, what the researchers can do is find people which are already living with household members who smoke, and then another group with no household member who smoke. Ano yun naman yung kaibahan nito kanina sa ginawa nating example para sa correlational research? Doon sa nauna nating example sa correlational research, isang grupo lang ang pinag-aralan natin, those who were exposed to secondhand smoking. At ginawa natin na variable, independent variable, yung exposure to secondhand smoke, tapos yung dependent variable natin, yung lung cancer. So, isang grupo lang ang pinag-aralan natin at dalawang variables. Dito naman sa causal comparative, naghanap tayo ng control group. Yung control group natin, yun yung grupo na hindi exposed sa second-hand smoke. At gusto natin pag-aralan kung itong exposed sa second-hand smoking at itong hindi exposed sa second-hand smoking, kung mayroong pagkakaiba dito sa likelihood ng pag-develop ng lung cancer. So, yun yung kaibahan. Sa causal comparative, at least two groups ang pinag-aralan natin. Dito naman sa correlational research, isang grupo lang. The fourth type of quantitative research that I'd like to discuss to you today is experimental research. This is also called true experimentation. Bakit kamo? Kasi maaari nating gawin ang random assignment of subjects. In this type of research, researcher mismo ang naggugrupo ng participants niya sa research niya. So, maaaring i-determine ni researcher kung saang grupo mabibilong ang isang participant. Pero you have to remember this one, random ang assignment, which means to say, bawat isang participant sa research na ito has an equal chance to be assigned to a particular group. Experimental research are often thought to occur just in laboratories, but it is not always the case. Kasi mayroon tayong tinatawag na social experimental research na kung saan ginagawa ang research outside laboratories. Yun nga lang, medyo may kahirapan ng pag-control ng ibang variables. So, minsan, hindi natin masisiguro na iyong resulta or iyong dependent variable ay dahil lamang sa independent variable natin. Kasi may mga extraneous variables that could have affected our dependent variable. Yan ay kung sa labas ng laboratorio natin gagawin ang isang experimental research. Another feature of an experimental research is that the independent variable is manipulated to know its effects on the dependent variable. So, halimbawa, mayroon kang pag-aaral tungkol sa whether or not mabisa ang isang gamot para sa pababa ng lagnat ng tao. So, let's say, this drug A is your independent variable, and you want to find out its effectiveness in lowering the body temperature of a person na mayroong fever or lagnat. So, ang gagawin mo kapag tinatawag na pag sinasabi nating i-manipulate yung independent variable, i-control mo yung dosage ng gamot na gagamitin mo sa experiment mo. So, one group tatanggap ng a certain dosage, another group tatanggap ng a lesser dosage, at yung isang grupo hindi tatanggap ng drug na pinag-aaralan mo. So, yun yung tinatawag nating manipulation of the independent variable. Bali, si researcher ang nagdi-determine ng degree or dosage ng kanyang independent variable na ibibigay sa kanyang subjects or participants of the study. What are examples of experimental research? If you are from the Philippines at lagi mong pinapanood ng balita, maybe you're familiar with the first example. Ito yung pag-aaral ng Philippine Department of Science and Technology tungkol sa kung mabisang gamot ang virgin coconut oil para sa mga taong infected ng novel coronavirus. Sa pag-aaral na to, bali ni-randomly assign ng researchers ang mga taong may mild symptoms ng COVID-19 at binigyan sila ng certain amount of coconut oil. Tapos, mayroon ding grupo na hindi naka-receive ng virgin coconut oil at kinumpara ang naging resulta after a certain period of time. So, sa ganung klaseng pag-aaral, masasabi natin yung experimental research kasi unang-una, may random assignment ng participants. So, bali researcher ang nag-determine kung sino ang mapapabilang sa experimental group, yung grupo na naka-receive ng virgin coconut oil, at yung control group, yung grupo na hindi mabibigyan ng independent variable, which is the virgin coconut oil. Sa isang pag-aaral naman na binanggit dito sa course-hero.com, may isang psychologist or cognitive psychologist na pinag-aralan niya yung epekto ng coconut oil and memory function. Sa pag-aaral na ito, mayroon siyang 3 grupo kung saan ni-randomly assigned niya ang mga elderly people na may early diagnosis ng Alzheimer's disease. So, sa isang grupo, binigyan niya ng 4 na teaspoons of coconut oil a day. Yung isang grupo naman, 2 teaspoons lang. At yung isang grupo, ito yung control group na hindi nakatanggap ng coconut oil. Tapos, after a certain period of time, kinumpare niya ang memory function ng 3 grupo. Itong examples ng experimental research natin. Kasi unang-una, may random assignment ng grupo or participants to a certain group, and then may manipulation ng independent variable. Salamat sa panonood sa aking vlog at sana may napulot kayo sa discussion natin today. Kung mayroon kayong request for topics na gusto nyong pag-usapan natin, feel free to message me to my Gmail account. Makikita nyo yan pag kinlik nyo yung channel page ko. Makikita nyo yung Gmail address ko doon at pwede nyong i-email doon